The clock in the east corridor read 11:47 when the bell rang. Elena Moore counted it without meaning to. One ring, then silence. She had a habit of counting bells when she was nervous, a habit her mother had given her long before she understood why. One ring meant nothing. One ring was a kitchen summons, a laundry order, something ordinary. But ordinary bells did not ring from corridors where the lights had never been turned on. She had worked at Valenti Manor for exactly 1 day, and in that day she had already memorized every door. She was forbidden to open. This was one of them. Victor Hale, the butler who had welcomed her that morning with such careful warmth, had said the east wing was closed. He had not said why. Old houses, he told her, make sounds, and the wise do not answer them. Elena was not wise tonight. She followed the sound anyway. The door at the end of the corridor stood open. Inside, the table was set for 2. The food was still steaming, impossibly, in a house where no one had cooked in hours. 2 glasses of wine caught the candlelight. A single white jasmine bloom lay across a folded napkin, and beside it, 2 small place cards. She read the first one without meaning to. Her own name, in handwriting that was not her own. The second card was angled toward the empty chair across from hers. Her mother's name. Her mother, who had been dead for 18 years. Her mother, who, according to every story Elena had ever been told, had betrayed a family she had never even heard of, and vanished into a case no one in Elena's life had ever managed to close. She did not hear him arrive. That, more than anything, told her what kind of man Adrian Valenti was. A man whose silence had been trained, the way other men trained their hands. Adrian's voice came from behind her. "Who told you to enter this room?" "No one." "But someone knew I would." He did not answer that. He did not need to, because at that exact moment, an old phonograph began to turn on its own. The phonograph crackled to life. Her mother's voice filled the room. "Elena, if you are hearing this..." Then the betrayal is still inside the house. The candles went dark, all of them in the same breath. Footsteps broke into a run down the corridor. Elena did not chase them. She stood very still in a room, set for a dinner no one had eaten in 18 years, and understood, for the first time since she had walked through the gates of Valenti Manor, that she had not been hired, she had been summoned. 12 hours earlier, Elena Moore had arrived at Valenti Manor the way most desperate decisions arrive, quietly, with no better option behind her. She had spent 4 years as an archive assistant at a private research library, the kind of job that suited a mind like hers, a mind that could not rest until every document sat exactly where it belonged, that noticed when a single ledger had been shifted a half-inch from where it should lie. When the library closed for good, taking her income with it, she had not expected to end up holding a suitcase outside a mansion built like a fortress. But rent did not wait for pride, and so here she was. Victor Hale descended the staircase with the measured grace of a man who had performed this welcome many times before. "Miss Moore, we have been expecting you." Victor Hale had served the Valenti family for over 30 years, and it showed in every motion he made. He told her she came recommended for her work in records and archives, which struck Elena as odd. She had never named the library to anyone in her application. She let the thought pass. People remembered things in strange ways. He paused at the foot of the stairs and folded his hands. "There are only 3 rules in this house, Miss Moore. Do not ask about guests who arrive after midnight. Do not touch any document belonging to Mr. Valenti. And do not enter the east wing. May I ask why? Old houses make sounds. The wise do not answer them. Victor's voice carried such practiced gentleness that the warning slid past her like a draft beneath a door. She was given her first task before she had even unpacked: deliver a set of files to the master of the house. She did not know yet that the man she was about to meet ran nearly every illegal shipment moving through 3 ports, or that he had not trusted a new face inside these walls in over a decade. Marcus was already speaking when Elena entered. His voice was low and controlled, but his jaw was tight. The route was clean 3 weeks ago. Now the council knows our drop point before our own men do. That does not happen by accident, Adrian. Adrian answered without looking up from the documents in front of him. Then find me the accident, Marcus, because right now all I have is a leak and a council that wants my chair more than they want the truth. A council elder at the far end of the table did not trouble himself with subtlety. 2 shipments in a month, Adrian. The seat your father built does not survive a 3rd. Find the traitor, or we will find a replacement who can. Adrian turned the page in front of him and answered without looking up. Reroute everything through the northern corridor tonight. If the leak is inside this house, I want it bleeding into a dead end, not a live one. It was the first time Elena saw the other half of him, not the man who would later bind her hand in his study, but the one who could reroute an entire criminal empire with the same calm he used to greet a housemaid. Elena entered moments later, at the worst possible moment, the way new things always do. She set the files down quietly, hoping to disappear, but a single page slipped from the stack and landed face up on the floor. She knelt to retrieve it, and in the half-second her eyes passed over the paper. Something in her trained mind caught fire. The page was a photocopy, slightly paler than the others, the margins a fraction narrower. Someone had swapped the original. This page has been replaced. He crossed the room in 4 strides and took the page from her hand. His voice was very quiet. You are either very calm, Miss Moore, or very unaware. I have been called both. He did not look at her again. He turned the page toward the light. Who approved her file? You did, sir. Adrian said nothing more. But he was certain, with the cold clarity of a man who remembered every signature he had ever made, that he had signed no such thing. The interrogation came an hour after the candles went dark in the east wing. Adrian had not raised his voice once, but the questions came like blades, precise, unhurried, and patient in the way that only truly dangerous men know how to be. Elena did not look away from him. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. Why was my dead mother's name inside your house? Adrian met her gaze without flinching. I did not know you had a mother named Margaret. I did not know you had a mother at all. Miss Moore, your file says nothing of the kind. Then someone wrote a file that lied to both of us. It was, perhaps, the first true thing either of them had said to the other. They pulled her employment file together, the 3 of them circling a single folder like wolves, around something that might be food or might be a trap. Elena's file had been added to the household records at 13 minutes past 2 in the morning, hours before she had even arrived at the gate. The signature authorizing her hire bore Adrian's name, but the strokes were wrong. Beneath a yellowed sheet at the back of the folder, sat a name that had clearly once been listed and just as clearly been erased. Margaret Moore, followed by 4 faded words, transferred by order of the house. Marcus spoke first, his hand resting near the inside of his jacket. She is a plant. Somebody is using her to get inside. Victor answered before Adrian could. If she were a spy, Mr. Vale, she would hardly have wandered into a forbidden room on her very first night, in full view of the master of the house. Spies are patient, grief is not. It was a small thing, the way Victor stepped between Elena and suspicion so easily, so naturally. Elena did not yet know, to wonder, why a butler who barely knew her would defend her so quickly. She only knew that someone in this strange house had chosen to be kind. It was well past midnight when Elena finally returned to the small room she had been given beneath the eaves. She emptied her apron pockets out of habit, the way her mother had taught her to do every night without fail. And something fell onto the quilt that made her blood go cold. A silver spoon, old and tarnished at the edges, engraved with 2 letters she had not seen in 18 years. M.M. Margaret Moore's spoon. She had not put it there. Someone else had. And whoever it was, they had known exactly which pocket to choose. The days that followed moved with a strange, deliberate rhythm. Elena did not yet know that an elderly housemaid named Beatrice Cole had once worked alongside her mother as the manor's cook, and had spent 20 years keeping a quiet promise to wait and to place certain objects exactly where a particular pair of eyes would find them. Beatrice had known Margaret as a friend. She did not know what Margaret had been fighting. She only remembered the small things, the dishes Margaret used to make, the jasmine she kept on the sill, the 17 precise folds she pressed into every napkin without fail. Those were the things Beatrice repeated now, one at a time, in Elena's path. A folded linen napkin appeared beneath Elena's door, creased in 17 folds. Elena counted them twice before she trusted the number, then went looking for a 17th volume in the house's private archive, not by guessing, but by following the only logic that had ever made sense to her. Inside the 17th ledger, a page had been torn out long ago, leaving only a jagged edge and a single line. The betrayal came from the man who could enter every room without being questioned. It was, infuriatingly, a description that fit nearly everyone in the house. Adrian moved through every room he owned. Victor held keys to every door in the building. Marcus answered to no one but Adrian himself. She cut her hand, reaching too quickly for a falling stack of files. Adrian found her like that, and without asking, he took her hand and bound it properly, his movements quick and certain. She watched him bind the cut with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times before. You know how to do this. He did not slow his hands. Your mother taught me. A long time ago. She went very still. You knew her. He finished the bandage and set her hand down carefully before he continued. She saved my life. And years after I took control of this family, I found a file, a single page that suggested your mother may never have done the things she was accused of. I had every reason to look closer. I chose not to. Elena did not respond right away. She only looked at him, the bandage still loose around her palm, and understood that whatever was buried in this house, the man across from her had helped bury it, not with his hands, but with his silence. Years ago, before he had inherited the full weight of the Valenti name, there had been an ambush, a rival family's attempt to remove him before he ever reached power. Margaret Moore had pulled him from a burning car with her own hands and disappeared into the chaos of that night. By morning, the family's story had already hardened into fact. Margaret had sold the family's shipping routes to the men who attacked them. He told her the story slowly, his voice even, his eyes on the fire. That was the story I grew up believing. Until years later, when I found a single page in storage that did not match anything else in her file. I closed the file instead of opening it further, because the council was already circling for blood. Elena looked at the fire for a moment. Then she looked at him. You did not erase her name, Adrian. You only decided it was easier not to restore it. He did not argue. There was nothing to argue with. It was Beatrice who finally found the courage to speak, though only in fragments. Beatrice folded her hands around her cup and finally spoke. Your mother ran the East Wing kitchen once, child. Long before it was ever forbidden, she and I cooked that very meal 100 times. I do not know what she was mixed up in. Truly, I do not. But I know she never once stopped humming while she worked, right up until the week she disappeared. Beatrice opened her mouth to say more, but the kitchen door opened, and Marcus stepped through on some pretense, and her words folded back into silence. The next morning, Beatrice did not appear for the breakfast service. Victor explained, with practiced sorrow, that she had taken ill and gone to stay with family. Elena did not believe a word of it. Beatrice's clothes still hung in the wardrobe. Her medicine sat untouched on the shelf. Her only pair of traveling shoes remained exactly where she had left them beneath the bed. When Elena asked the staff rotation log who had last seen Beatrice, one name stood out. Marcus had signed himself off duty for the entire stretch of that night, on a route he later claimed led nowhere near the kitchen wing. It did not match what 2 other staff members remembered seeing. Beneath the loose floorboard near Beatrice's headboard, Elena's fingers found half of an old photograph. 2 women stood smiling in the frame. A third figure beside them had been torn away entirely, leaving only the edge of a sleeve. It was Elena who proposed the alliance, not out of trust, but out of necessity. Elena laid her conditions out quietly, one by one, without apology. If we do this, there are conditions. You do not hide evidence from me, no matter how it reflects on this family. You do not enter my room without my permission. You do not decide, on my behalf, what I am strong enough to hear. And if I choose to leave this house, you will not stop me. Agreed. He said it without hesitation, which surprised her more than any of the Manor's secrets had so far. Outside the walls of their fragile new arrangement, the world Adrian governed continued to fracture. The council summoned him before their full assembly and made their threat explicit. Find the traitor within 7 days, or surrender his seat. Marcus's name had also surfaced on a communication log linking him to a rival family, a connection he had never disclosed. Adrian responded by creating a false shipment route, a dead trail baited with false information, to identify which council member was passing intelligence to Victor's contacts. That night, neither of them could sleep, so they ended up in the library instead, splitting a plate of bread and cold chicken between 2 stacks of ledgers, comparing notes by candlelight because Adrian did not trust the main lights left burning past midnight. Adrian lowered his voice. He spoke to the candle more than to her. I do not remember the last time someone sat across from me at a table and did not want something from me. I want several things from you, actually. Mostly the truth, on time, every time. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost. That is a different kind of wanting. He told her a small thing, then, a memory he had not spoken aloud in years. Margaret had insisted on teaching him to cook, the night before his first council meeting. He had burned everything. She had laughed at him for a full minute before taking over. She looked up from the ledger. Did she always cook for the people she protected? Only the ones she thought were worth the trouble. It was a small exchange, almost nothing, and yet Elena found herself replaying it long after the candle had burned low. The particular quiet of a man who had spent his whole life being needed, finally being simply kept company instead. When the two halves of the photograph finally met on the desk between them, the picture they formed was not the clean answer either of them had hoped for. Standing beside Margaret was Victor Hale, younger, smiling in a way Elena had never seen from him. Behind them both, half in shadow, stood Marcus, younger too, but unmistakable. Their hands nearly touched as they both reached for the same corner of the photograph at once. Neither of them moved away. That same evening, going through a small trunk Beatrice had quietly left for her, Elena found her mother's old dress folded at the bottom, jasmine petals pressed flat within its lining. Stitched into the seam were 5 words, 11:47, beneath the table. Adrian stood beside her as the realization settled. He did not reach for her. He waited, and when Elena finally reached for his hand instead, something passed between them that neither one of them tried to name out loud. They returned to the dining room exactly 1 minute before the hour. At 11:47 precisely, a soft mechanical click sounded beneath the table's center leg, and a section of the parquet floor slid sideways to reveal a narrow stone staircase. At the end of the passage, a small chamber opened before them. Bare stone walls, an old stain darkened nearly black with age, and a list of names carved crudely into the rock. Several crossed through with deep, angry strokes. In the corner sat an old recording cylinder. At the far wall, a heavy iron door secured with a lock that had clearly not been opened in years. The recording cylinder turned. Her mother's voice filled the stone chamber. The route was sold from inside the house. Isabella saw the ledger with her own eyes. The man with the keys knows exactly where it is hidden. He has known all along. She did not say a name. Elena noticed the marks along the wall first, a long column of small scratches. She counted them twice before she trusted the number. Nearly 6 months of tally marks, scratched, 1 day at a time, by someone who had clearly been alive, and counting long after the date everyone in this house had been told Margaret Moore had died. From behind the iron door, faint but unmistakable, came 3 slow knocks. They had no key. Not yet. The chamber had been searched, hastily and recently, papers thrown loose across the stone floor. Elena's hand went instinctively to her apron pocket, where the silver spoon had rested safely for days. It was gone. The same shell company Victor had used 18 years ago to cover Margaret's supposed betrayal had appeared again in the most recent stolen route payments, connecting the old treachery directly to the thefts plaguing Adrian's operation right now. Victor was not merely hiding the past. He was still committing it. The discovery that nearly broke them came from Adrian himself. Buried at the bottom of a locked drawer, A single page he had kept hidden from the very alliance he had agreed to honor. An order, signed in his own hand. Elena's voice was quiet. That made it worse. You told me you found evidence she might be innocent. You never told me you gave an order about her at all. He did not look away. He owed her that much. I believed she was alive, hiding somewhere within reach of people who wanted her dead for what she knew. I wanted her moved before the council's hunters found her first. I gave the order to Victor to carry out quietly. Locate Margaret Moore. Move her beyond Valenti territory before the council finds her. He came back and told me he had found her too late. It was not, Elena realized, a question of whether she could trust him. It was something colder and more familiar. The realization that Adrian still believed he alone got to decide how much truth she was strong enough to carry. She set the document down on the desk between them. You do not get to keep deciding what I am allowed to know, Adrian. Not about my own mother. She left the study without waiting for his answer. True to the terms of their alliance, he did not follow her. Elena walked the garden path with no real plan beyond putting distance between herself and the house. She thought, for the first time in days, not about Victor or Marcus or locked doors, but about her mother. About whether the woman who had folded napkins into 17 perfect creases would have wanted her daughter standing in this garden at all, chasing a truth that had already cost so many people their lives. She nearly kept walking toward the gate. What stopped her was not Adrian. It was the quiet certainty that leaving now would mean someone else decided how this story ended. The same way someone else had decided how her mother's story ended 18 years ago. She would not let that happen twice. She did not get the chance to finish the thought. A masked figure emerged from the hedges and lunged for the pocket of her apron. Elena fought for it instinctively, and in the scuffle realized, with a jolt, that the pocket was already empty. The spoon had not been there since the tunnel. Marcus knelt beside her in the garden, breathing hard. He opened his coat to show her the silver spoon, wrapped carefully in cloth. I took it from the chamber after you left the tunnel. Someone else had already searched the room, and I knew they would come back for it. That is why I lied about where I was the night Beatrice disappeared. I was tracing who else had a key to that passage. He reached into his coat again and unfolded a fragment of a letter, old ink on heavy stationery. He read it aloud. If anything happens to me, watch the man who carries every key. Isabella. Isabella asked me, years before she died, to watch Victor Hale quietly, without ever telling Adrian why. I have been doing exactly that ever since. He pressed the spoon into her hands. Twisting the handle in her palm, Elena felt it give. The shaft separated to reveal a small, tarnished key hidden inside. Adrian arrived moments later, breathless. He did not reach for her. He spoke from 3 feet away. You can leave. Elena, I will not stop you. But if you choose to come back, I promise you this. I will never again decide, on my own, which truth you are allowed to carry. He did not ask her to stay. Elena looked down at the key now resting in her palm, then back at the manor rising dark against the evening sky, and chose, quietly, to walk back through its gates. Not for him, she told herself. For the truth still waiting on the other side of an iron door. The key fit the iron door exactly as Elena had somehow known it would. The woman waiting inside was not the ghost either of them had braced for. but a woman very much alive, thin and pale with the kind of stillness that comes from months of surviving on patience alone. The woman looked up from the shadows. Her voice was thin but steady. "You must be Margaret's girl. I would know that stillness anywhere." "My name is Grace Whitmore. I was Isabella Valenti's assistant, long before this family ever called me dead on paper. I came back the moment I heard a girl named Elena Moore had been hired into this house. Where Beatrice had carried Margaret's memory, Grace carried what Margaret had been fighting for. She did not tell Elena everything. She told her only what she needed to survive the next hour. Grace did not waste words. She leaned forward. "Victor Hale is the traitor in this house. Your mother built every clue in this place to answer to no one but you, because she knew, even then, that I might not live long enough to finish telling it myself. Beatrice is still alive, held somewhere in this wing. We do not have time for the rest of it." It was the answer to a question that had haunted Elena since the very first night. Why a man with no apparent reason to trust her had instead protected her, vouched for her again and again. Victor had not brought her into this house out of kindness. He had brought her here because she was the only key left that he had not yet managed to steal. Victor's voice came from the top of the stone staircase. He did not need to raise it. "I had hoped you would open it for me quietly, Miss Moore. It would have been so much simpler that way." Smoke began curling down the stone staircase before Elena could even process the sound of his voice, and somewhere above them, the old wood of the east wing had already begun to burn. There was no time left for grief or shock. Elena counted 3 short warning rings from the bell above the linen passage, 1 pause after each, and remembered which service corridor answered that particular pattern. She moved fast, half carrying Grace, while the smoke thickened with every step. Grace led them toward the linen passage where she had heard Beatrice coughing through the wall. Elena found her there, bound, frightened, but alive, and got them both moving before the ceiling above began to crack. While Elena fought her way through smoke and memory, Adrian faced the man who had raised him from boyhood. In the same great hall where Victor had once taught a frightened young heir how to stand without flinching. Victor's composure had not yet cracked. He stood at the center of the great hall as though he still belonged there. "You were always going to lose your seat to that council, Adrian, with or without my help. I simply made certain it happened on a schedule that suited me." Adrian looked at him for a long moment before he spoke. 30 years, Victor. 30 years of bowing in doorways and telling me old houses make sounds the wise do not answer. All of it just to bury one ledger. Victor's composure finally cracked at the sight of 3 women he had believed were either dead, dying, or too broken to ever stand in front of him again. Elena did not waste the moment on shock. She set the trap she had built in her head the entire way up the stairs. Elena stepped forward. Her voice was perfectly even. Margaret hid the ledger beneath the chapel altar. "We have already sent someone to bring it up." Victor's certainty undid him before he heard himself speak. "That is impossible. There was never anything beneath the altar. She hid it inside the service bell in the east tower, and I burned the bell housing myself 2 winters ago." The room went silent around his own voice. Victor heard it land a half-second after he had said it, the exact shape of the trap closing. The room went very still. "I never said she used the bell. A beat. Then Elena stepped forward. A beat. Then Elena stepped forward again. And how did you know she never reached the altar? Victor said nothing. He did not need to. The silence itself was the answer. The silence of a man who knew, precisely and firsthand, where Isabella Valenti had died. He reached for the old revolver kept on the side table, more desperation than plan. Adrian crossed the room before the weapon ever cleared the table's edge, twisting it from Victor's grip with the economy of a man who had practiced exactly this kind of ending. Between them, Elena's precision and Adrian's strength, Victor Hale finally stood defeated in the same hall where he had spent 30 years pretending loyalty was the only thing he had ever sold. The second recording played at last. Her mother's voice filled the hall. Victor Hale sold our roots for money he did not need and a position he was never owed. He killed Isabella Valenti to keep her quiet and erased names from this house's record like they had never mattered to anyone at all. If Elena ever finds her way into this house, do not let her believe I died serving the Valentis. Tell her I died protecting the truth, and that I loved her enough to leave it behind for her to find. Nobody in that hall spoke for a long moment. Adrian crossed the room and took her hand. He asked, for the first time in any room she had stood in with him, "What do you want done with him?" Elena looked at Victor for a long moment. Then she answered, "Not death. You erased my mother's name for 20 years without once looking back to question it. You are going to live long enough to hear it spoken correctly again, every single day for as long as it takes." Victor was held under guard until morning. By sunrise, Adrian had delivered both the man and the ledger pages recovered from the chamber to federal investigators already building a case against the corrupted council. Men who had known about the stolen routes for years and said nothing. Adrian chose federal exposure over a quiet execution for a reason that had nothing to do with mercy. A dead man's crimes die with him. A public case would expose every council member who had paid Victor's silence and strip them of their seats far more completely than a body ever could. 3 weeks passed. Margaret Moore's name was formally restored to the Valenti family records. Isabella Valenti was honored, at last, as the victim she had always been. Grace and Beatrice were given protection and the kind of quiet they had both more than earned. The council members who had taken Victor's silence money were suspended pending investigation, and Adrian began the slow work of rebuilding a leadership structure that did not depend on men who could be bought. Marcus was named head of security, with no shadows left for him to operate inside of. Elena found Adrian late one evening after the first suspension hearing, his collar loosened, a thin cut above his eyebrow from a confrontation he refused to describe in detail. She did not ask twice. She simply took the cloth from his hand and finished what he had started clumsily himself, her fingers steady against his jaw. Adrian watched her finish, binding the cut above his eyebrow. His voice was low. "You do not have to do this. I know. That is rather the point." He let her finish in silence, and something in his shoulders, drawn tight since the hearing began, finally eased. He let her finish in silence. When she set the cloth down, he spoke. "I want you here, Elena. I want that more than I have wanted almost anything. But wanting you has never given me the right to keep you." She was very clear. She had been thinking about it for some time. "I am staying, not as a maid, and not as a guest either. I want full access to this family's archive. Every record, every file. Nothing hidden, nothing quietly removed because it is inconvenient to remember. I want it understood that the East Wing is no longer forbidden to anyone in this house, including me. And I want a title that means something. Adrian agreed without negotiation, and within the week, a small brass plaque appeared on the door of what had once been the most feared room in Valenti Manor, Director of Valenti Archives. He looked at the small brass plaque and then at her. "Do you intend to open every locked door in this house, Director Moore? Only the ones you are still afraid of?" He laughed, low and genuine, and when he kissed her, it carried none of the desperation of two people running from danger. It carried something steadier, not a promise of forever, but permission, finally, to begin. On a quiet evening that no longer needed a clock to mark 11:47, Elena walked into the dining room that had once frightened her more than any locked door in the manor, and for the first time, she was the one who set the table. 2 cards, written in her own steady hand, Adrian Valenti, Elena Moore. She set the 2 cards down and stood back to look at them. Then she said quietly, "This time, no one chose our seats for us." Somewhere in the walls, the old phonograph stirred to life one final time, a house finally allowed to remember out loud instead of in secret. The old phonograph stirred to life one final time, her mother's voice clear as the first night. The house remembers every name they tried to erase. The screen went dark on that single, steady truth. Was Elena right to stay and rebuild the truth inside Valenti Manor, or should she have walked away from Adrian forever? Share your answer in the comments below, and subscribe to Mafia Hearts and Secrets for more dangerous romances hidden behind the doors of the underworld.